do water?
I was at White King House.
Where is he? Should be more. You ever do anything with Greg Hobbs?
I know Greg, yes. He's very
He's
active.
So anyway,
Are you a water buffalo?
it's hopefully helpful long term.
I think you have to be like 100 years old.
Yeah.
I'd like to
I always wanted to join that group because they have those funny little hats.
I know you
get started early.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Ready when you are.
Are we on online there, Laura?
You are now.
Okay. Commissioners, if I could have you come forward, please. Commissioners, our first three items, Margaret Taylor is going to present on essentially follow-up from our forum in Glenwood Springs for underrepresented groups in the state park system in our next state park. Then we're going to have the presentation from Ms. Spira, and then afterwards we have one quick tidy up motion that we're going to do for our big game motion that we spent so much time on. Margaret, take us away.
Let me get your thing up real quick.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
just waiting for the PowerPoint real quick.
One for you and one for the teacher.
Commissioners, my name is Margaret Taylor, and I'm the Assistant Director for Capital Parks and Trails. And I just first wanted to say welcome to the new commissioners. We haven't really had time to talk yet, but I am going to be talking about some things that we did in previous meetings, so I'm happy to fill you in on anything if you so desire. So I'm here today to give a presentation on a project the division is working on, which will develop criteria to find the best candidates or candidates for future Colorado state parks. This comes on the heels of a successful forum that you all held in September, in which people from diverse backgrounds had a discussion with you all. They were asked to think outside the box, and there was a really good dialogue. The forum reached over 15,000 people on Facebook Live, and if you want more information on that, you can look in your packets. The next steps for staff is to start building a set of criteria that will help us determine the best location and use of the next state park. This is timely because there are several initiatives right now that intersect with this work. The Future Generation Act declares a goal for CPW to identify and begin to plan the development of a new Colorado State Park. Also, right now we're working on our CPW operationals plan, and that includes an objective to develop criteria to evaluate potential new state parks consistent with the vision and mission of CPW and ensure it's used throughout the identification process. Finally, the new SCORP plan includes the priority area sustainable access and opportunity. Relevant objectives for this priority include advancing Governor Hickenlooper's Colorado the Beautiful vision that every Coloradan will live within 10 minutes of a park, trail, or vibrant green space. Also, better understanding and addressing barriers to engage people in outdoor recreation is a part of the plan. So, right now, the division is working on creating these criteria. We have convened an internal parks criteria working group and will expand this to include representation from across regions and sections. Fortunately, we will not have to start from scratch as we'll use previous initiatives to help guide the work. This includes the 2000 Crown Jewel search, which you have all seen, previous commissioners have seen that in your packet. So that's something that we will use as we move forward. So what we're doing now is we're going to start conducting a literature review, including examples from other states that can help us in this process. And the criteria that we come up with is going to reference both statewide vision goals as well as underlying park level objectives. And it will help us determine if a potential site will be economically viable. One thing we did hear from the forum is that more of the public is interested in being involved in the process. We're also interested in hearing from them. Once the working group develops the list of public targets, we will develop a proposal for public involvement and outreach. So why do we want to do this? We'll be able to evaluate properties that come available for purchase or lease to see if they are good system fits. But also we'll be able to really determine what types of properties we're looking for in the next state park or parks. Also, having criteria developed to make sure a property is financially viable is very important to creating a successful park. And we're also going to look into criteria that really defines what financially viable means. So I think that's going to be very important. So the timeline in a nutshell. First, as I mentioned, we'll build a literature review and we'll talk to other states. We'll look at the SCORP information and we'll look at national trends. Then our goal is to develop a clear vision and goal for the whole system, as well as what we're looking for in the next state parks. Then we'll do some preliminary outreach and figure out who those groups we want to reach out to are. Then our group will develop and refine the criteria. We can go back out to the public and make sure that that criteria is palatable to the public. And then we can pilot this criteria and ground truth it, because there are several examples right now that we could look at and really run a property through the criteria. And then we'll bring that back to you all for final approval. So I just wanted to say thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions or take any comments and feedback that you have back to our group.
Commissioners, comments or questions for Margaret? Commissioner Vigil.
Margaret, in looking at this, are we going to look at, as an alternative, expanding some of our current parks where the demand really, because demand has to be part of this criteria. I mean, that's, if we pick some one corner of the state where nobody's going to drive to, it's not ever going to cash flow. And I know that's going to be expensive if we look at front range parks and try to expand them, but in the long run, it could end up being cheaper. Because if you're going to look at underrepresented clientele, they're going to want to be close to home. I think that's one of the things we've seen as a barrier for inner city people anyhow, is to get outdoors is we don't have transportation to go that far. So as long as that's criteria is included, I would be happy.
Okay. Yes, and that's one thing that is in the operational plan, that we look at existing parks and decide which ones we should expand. And I think this criteria could work for properties that are adjacent to existing parks, where we're just doing an analysis, a financial analysis, to make sure that if we take a property on, that it will be financially viable. And then also the services that we can provide. Also, I think, as you mentioned, in the Front Range, we're seeing a lot of pressure on those state parks. Those state parks are at capacity in times that they never were at capacity before. So lifting some of the pressure off those Front Range parks is important. But I will say also, there are some parks that are off the Front Range that are amazing to me, that are at capacity, such as the Rifle Complex. They go to capacity quite often.
Other comments or questions? Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you, and we'll keep you informed.
Next up is our friends from Aspira, Mr. Chick.
Morning, Chairman, Commissioners, Director Corey Chick, License and Pass Section Manager. Chairman, if it's okay, if there's I just have a couple things I wanted to touch on prior to inviting Aspira to the podium.
Very good.
Okay. First thing I wanted to touch on is that at the last commission meeting, we had discussed the project plan and how we, at that time, did not have an approved project plan to work off of. I just did want to bring that up to the attention of the commission, that we currently do have an approved project plan we are working on. And currently, right now, in all green status. I'll invite our project manager up here in a bit to be able to talk about that some and address any questions the commission may have, but I did want to let y'all know about that.
Thank you, Corey.
Okay. Financials also come up yesterday as far as the 1.3 million being able to undetermine or not determine exactly where those funds lie. I did meet with the president, Seth Rosenberg, with Aspira, and we have engaged and we'll be working together to make sure the right folks are at the table to work on those issues.
Corey, I'm sorry, and maybe I'm not the only commissioner. Tell me, we had so many numbers, so many different things flowing around yesterday. This 1.3 relates to?
The governor's dashboard and what was presented yesterday.
Thank you.
And that's actually really what I wanted to point in on. Of course, I can answer any questions, but then invite Aspira to the...
Any comments or questions, commissioners? Let's have Aspira up then.
Okay.
Chairman, Commissioners, Director, good morning. I'm Mark Trevette, CEO of Aspira. Happy to be here today representing Aspira, along with two members of my team, Seth Rosenberg, who's our president, and Steve Wade, our chief technology officer. Both of those gentlemen have been at several of the recent meetings, so I think you're familiar with them. I actually attended our meeting, or your meeting, back in January, which was kind of a celebration, if you will, of the launch of the system. And since that time, of course, you're all aware there have been bumps in the road and some challenges within the project. And so I wanted to be here today to reinforce our commitment to this project. We're fully committed. We've made a lot of changes over the past several months that together with Corey's organization will ensure the success of the project going forward. I also wanted to let you guys know about a couple of organizational changes that impact the team that you deal with or that you will see in front of you at future commission meetings. Gary Evans, who you've seen many times, is no longer with the organization. And then Bill Joplin, who's also been in front of the commission quite a bit, is moving into a different role within Aspira. We have now added Susan Grant as our Vice President of Client Services. Susan's been involved in the Colorado project kind of behind the scenes for a long time. She's already fully engaged. She's been on site meeting with Corey and his team, and I really look forward to this new team serving this project going forward. Happy to take any questions from you, or if it's appropriate, I'll turn it over to Seth to give more details on current status.
Commissioners, any comments or questions for Mr. Trevette?
Morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Director. I'm Seth Rosenberg, President of Aspira. I just wanted to reiterate what Corey touched on regarding I'll call the variance between the governor's report and accounting systems. We're fully engaged. I believe what we're going to find is that we need to identify which reports should be used for true financial bottom line accounting versus snapshots. And we'll work together to define which are the right reports for all different situations and make sure, of course, everything tick and ties to the bottom line correctly. The second thing I want to touch on is Commissioner Zimmerman, I know, has interest in apps. We have started working on a framework for an app for hunt fish, and would love, if you're open to it, to engage with you and bring in the right people from our team to get a better sense of the ultimate goals, desires, wants in an app or apps to serve the overall Colorado wildlife parks hunt fish realm.
That's great. I would encourage you to include Commissioner McDaniel in that as well.
And with that, if there's any questions for me, if not, I'll pass it to Steve Wade.
Any comments or questions? Very good.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Chairman, Commissioners, Director. I'm Steve Wade. I'm the CTO of Aspira, and I wanted to touch on a couple of the issues that we've had in previous meetings here. Specifically, the issue around fading licenses. You may recall from our last commission meeting, we made a commitment to have that fixed in the field by February. There was a number of comments from the commissioners that you'd like that accelerated, I should say, which we did. We've, in actual fact, already deployed the first wave of new printers to fix this problem, and that covers by volume about 70% of all of the documents that were printed that had that problem. We will, in fact, send a second wave out in the next 2 or 3 weeks, which will then cover all of the locations that by volume have printed about 99% of those documents. So there was, you asked us to try and get it in before Thanksgiving, and before the Christmas season. We've got 70% there. We'll be about, again, 99% there, hopefully, a couple of weeks before Christmas. So I think we've made good progress there. We've found the solution. We worked very closely with the staff to make sure, on the Colorado side, to make sure that the system worked. We went through a complete test phase, and then, as I said, we've deployed. So. Any questions around that issue?
Comments or questions? Very good.
Okay, that's it.
Commissioners, we had a lot of talk yesterday about various things that the system was keeping us from doing. And so I think since Aspira has come all the way out to Burlington, we ought to talk a little bit about that. So I can either start off or another commissioner could volunteer, but.
Take charge.
Well, then this is really, I think, more for Mr. Trevette, to be honest with you. Yesterday was, I'm glad to see the progress. I'm very glad to see the progress. And Commissioner McDaniels, we're relying on him. And so I feel, Marvin, I don't want to speak for you, but I feel like we're technically making progress here. At the same time, for us to go through a meeting yesterday, we're told, no, you can't do that because we'd have to hard code, right? I mean, that's a frustration for us because we're trying to make these changes, and part of the promise of the system is that we'll be more flexible and we'll be able to make more changes in our management. And so the signs of success, on the one hand, I think are very much what you've just reported to us, which is extremely helpful, the technical things, the accomplishing tasks. But the bottom line is the system has to get to a point where we can run our business. And we're not there yet. And so the measurements, I think, and I'll let other commissioners speak up, is going to be, is the draw successful with our customers? Is the leftover process successful with our customers? We can tick off all the boxes on an Excel spreadsheet accomplishing things, but if we have another year like last year, where we're getting hit from all of our customers constantly, that'll be tough. So I just want to encourage you guys to help us on these larger strategic roles, and that's how we're looking at it. The commission is looking at, is it a successful draw? Is it a successful leftover process? As opposed to just all the detail. So I'm not certain I have anything that you can tell me other than the performance is really the key here. And if we get great performance, a lot of the problems between the groups will go away. If we don't, it'll be tough just to rely on a spreadsheet with a lot of checked off boxes. So I don't know if that helps or if you want to respond. Or.
Sure, it certainly helps. And what I'll say is I understand exactly your perspective on needing to be able to run the business. And it's much more than, I'm very happy that we have a project plan right now. But when you print that project plan or you look at it, it's very much a spreadsheet. And simply checking the boxes is not sufficient. We have to work together with the Colorado team to ensure that the system fully supports what Colorado wants to do and needs to do. I think one of the keys to that success is regular, frequent, full disclosure and communication between the two teams. And I think that's something over the past few months that I've seen tremendously increase. For example, the regular communications that Steve and Commissioner McDaniel have to ensure that they're on the same page from a technical standpoint. I think that's really helping us, and I hope it's helping you as a commission. I do want to say, because of the depth and the breadth of what we're trying to complete over the next 12 months, there are going to be some of those things where if you come up with a new idea, The system can do it, but it may require some significant effort, which might derail the rest of the project. So to the extent things are configuration, which as I understand from a high-level overview of the meeting yesterday, many of the changes that were suggested are configuration-oriented. We can certainly handle that, and it doesn't impact the status of the project. What we want to be very careful of is that we don't agree to everything and end up negatively impacting the project. But we certainly understand the perspective about it's a business system, and it can't just be a ticking boxes on a spreadsheet.
Commissioner Vigil.
I think as an example, the commission really talked about having companion licenses, where if you buy an elk license, you get a discount on a bear license, as an example. And that's one thing the commission would have liked to have had, but there's no way we can have it this year for this season. But that's something to look forward for next season, that we would have that capability to do those kind of things, like mixing prices and animals together in one license.
Okay. We'll certainly stay. Like I said, the communication is key, so we'll continue to work with Corey and team. And if there's things like that we hear at the commission meeting, we'll, if you will, put them on the roadmap in terms of evaluation for, can we have it ready for next year?
Well, that's one thing that I would like to see, is that companion license, but I'm sure that other commissioners have more things that they would like to see. But that's just one example to put on that not too far future list.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Bray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My comments are just more general. It does seem, and our chairman alluded to this on his remarks, but it seems like every time we want to make a change, which I'm not a real technology person, so I understand there's a lot of stuff goes into that, but it is so extremely frustrating that every time we come up with an idea, well, we can't do that because it's going to cost a lot of money, we've got to revamp the whole system, and they don't seem like major changes. When we entered into this, we were promised pretty much the world, and we're not even getting an island most of the time. I'm very frustrated. Commissioner Zimmerman and I approached this idea of an app and whatnot. We even were approached by outside vendors that could work with you, and we were told, no, we can't do that. And so I'm extremely frustrated. Your company has not met up to my expectations at all. So you're putting our staff in an uncomfortable position because Corey has to sit up here every meeting and take our wrath, and it's not really his fault. So I appreciate the efforts you're making and the changes you've made, but we've got to get better performance.
Thank you, sir, for the feedback, and appreciate the comments. With respect to apps and other things, I saw that Seth and Commissioner Zimmerman were already speaking this morning. To the extent we've had that type of approach with kind of a hands-off, no, we're not willing to do that in the past. What I'd like to tell you is with some of the changes that we've made as an organization over the past year, frankly, some of which obviously haven't surfaced and been visible to you, but we are much more willing to entertain those types of things. We are already working on a framework app, as Seth mentioned, I believe Seth mentioned, with another state. And that's something that we can certainly bring in, and we can evaluate that for something that might work with you. Again, we want to be careful not to impact the overall direction of the project. But if there's something that is outside of the scope, we're not here trying to just say, we don't want to do it, it's going to cost a lot of money. We're open to having those discussions and making the types of improvements that you're requesting, as long as we don't impact the overall project plan.
Commissioner McDaniel.
Thank you very much for coming today. Move this a little farther away. Really appreciate the focus and the effort since October, and Seth coming on board. I think we've seen a better dedication of resources from Aspira. With regards to the project plan, maybe you can give me a little color. I'm not sure you could, or Steve or Seth, about, you heard that what is most important is that we enter this 2019 draw cycle. And as we enter this draw cycle, that the system is very stable, planned for, fully QA tested for the changes that we have already made or that are being contemplated, for example, some of which were discussed yesterday. So trying to take that Excel spreadsheet and breaking it down from just tasks to main issues or concerns to stabilize the system completely for that draw cycle. What are the areas that you would want to inform this commission about, or that Corey should be concerned about as we move forward here over the next few months, which are very critical and a really short timeline before, you know, our sportsmen start to begin submitting applications?
Yeah, as you implied, might be more appropriate. I'm going to let Steve take that one.
Yeah, good question, right? It's something we've been working on now since we had the problems a few months ago. I would specifically, the two main areas that we're focusing on is process flow, the sales flow, and I mentioned that in the last meeting, how we can streamline that through pre-population of fields, for instance, is one example, so that the whole sales process is much easier from a consumer's perspective, or much more intuitive at least. It's still somewhat complex. There's a lot of questions to ask. There's a lot of things that we need to gather in the system that meet the requirements of the state. So we can't, you know, make it Amazon-like, but we can make it a lot easier and a lot more intuitive. And we've been working pretty hard on that with the state. The second is obviously performance. The performance issues that we hit when we were doing leftover draw were not good. We've spent a lot of time doing a lot of tuning in the system and re-architecting the system to make sure that we don't run into those problems in the future. We did gather a lot of data at that point in time, and I mentioned that in previous meetings, and we're using that to do a lot of the tuning within the system. So I would say those are the two main ones. They're not the only areas that we're looking at. We've also had discussions with the state, and Corey's been up yesterday talking to you about changing the way we do the draws, simplifying the draws and taking some draws out and making other draws just more intuitive. Those all help from a systems perspective as well. They're not driven by the system, but they help from a systems perspective as well. Particularly, I think I mentioned again that, you know, we fulfilled somewhere in the order of 210,000 licenses in 6 weeks this year for you guys. If we spread that out a little bit, you know, it helps. And there's a lot of the proposals that Corey's putting forward that are doing that. It just makes sense. So there's a lot of areas that we're looking at overall, but as I said, performance and the process of acquiring or applying for licenses are really the two biggies from my perspective.
Just for the record, that's Mr. Wade talking.
Yes, I'm sorry.
No, that's
I
all
should
right.
introduce myself.
When you mean Amazon-like, Steve, are you talking about pre-population of the profile that our customers have online?
Yeah, somewhat. Yeah, it's that issue. I mean, if you think about the Amazon process, basically you select a product, you put it in the cart, you know, you're already signed on, and you're done. So it's a very, very simple process, right? So we can never get there because of the interactions necessary, right? Because we have a lot more questions. Where do you want to hunt? When do you want to hunt? How old are you? What are you licensed? All those kinds of things. So we have a lot more complex process. But if we think more about rather than what data do we want to collect, think about how do we get the end user from the beginning to the end as quickly as possible, right? What do we already know about them? For instance, pre-population, right? Use that term. Maybe we can apply some intelligence. If you bought this last year and it's the same kind of time period this year, you might want to do the same license again. So maybe we can apply some intelligence there to propose some licenses that are likely to be purchased. They may not. I mean, it may be a different choice. But trying to just make the whole process more intuitive and quicker. Because it is not, right now it's not. It's driven by the data that we want to collect, not from the consumer's perspective of, I just want to buy it, just sell it to me, right? Which is kind of the Amazon model. So again, I use that as an example because I think it's probably the industry standard of where we want to be. We can't get there because of the data we need to collect. But we can make improvements to the application process and the sales process, and we are doing that.
Steve, one of the weaknesses in the previous project plan was really around design and report requirements, not being really fully vetted out between Aspera and the agency. That's one of the things that you all talked about really nailing down.
Yes.
Into an amendment of that plan. You know, what's the confidence level you all are placing, or Corey, you're placing now, that we really have fully vetted design and report requirements in this project plan, so we get to the result we want at the completion of the plan?
Do you want Corey to answer that? I can give you my view, but I'll let Corey do
You
it.
might want both.
And actually, this might be a good time if I can
is Aspera is providing a reporting tool called Insights. Insights is a robust database that allows for us, allows for us to pull a large bulk of data away from the system so that we're not impacting response time, and we can then take that data and slice and dice it to meet the needs of what the requester of the report has asked for. So, for example, if we need something for sales or for marketing that's fishermen that have not renewed their licenses, we can go to this reporting tool, the marketing team can go to this reporting tool and pull that information. Then they can extract exactly what they need. Do they want it by month? Do they want it by age range? And so forth. So a lot of work is being done today. In the new project plan, the one that has been signed off, there is a timeline that allows for, and it's up here. Can we put it up there?
Since it's a PowerPoint, since it's in PDF form, I can't get it to share both sides.
Okay.
But it is in the documents.
Okay. So in your documents, you'll see it's almost swim lane-like. And from that perspective, there are the modules that are yet to be delivered. So as we work on operational reporting that still has to be corrected, we are planning the new reporting, and it is a timed effort that we've carved out so that when the Hunter Reservation system is delivered, that system will have the right reporting, the correct reporting, and the accurate reporting that CPW needs in order to be able to produce information for folks such as yourselves. Did I answer your question?
On the design side, you feel, I know that's probably more ramping down because obviously the system is up and running. Any design requirements moving forward for BRS, other things that you're still, phases that are now upcoming, all fully vetted? Still very high level of confidence about what we're about to implement?
They're being vetted through the meetings that we're holding weekly, so it's ongoing, and those will be produced, and then the clients in the Hunter Reservation area will look at those reports and sign off on those reports. So before the full module, and I don't mean to speak for you, Steve, so before the full module is delivered for sign-off, there will be sign-off on all those reports so that you will have exactly what you need.
Now, what I heard last time is that as those things are phasing in for the park system, we didn't see a conflict with the sportsman side for the wildlife system. You still believe that's true as we move into the first quarter of 2019?
Sorry, Corey Chick for the record again. Can you repeat that question?
As we move forward on BRS, other things that are happening in 2019, as those things come on and come more alive, more functionality, any conflict with the 19 cycle stabilizing the sportsman's draw? Because two things happening concurrently.
It is. So when you're talking about the production side versus the developmental side?
That side, yes.
Okay. That's the nice thing about having the approved project plan is that we're really working in two separate worlds to where some of those teams may overlap. For instance, especially on my side, I have teams that are both working on the developmental side and the production side as that relates. That's where my focus was, trying to get this plan in so that way I made sure I could have the right resources depending on which side of that we were focusing on. And typically within a day, we're focusing on both sides of that. As myself and Commissioner McDaniel has spoke, stabilization is pretty much my #1 priority at this point, because without stabilization, everything that we're doing within this plan really doesn't mean a lot. So we will continue to definitely have that as a priority as far as stabilization, and then move forward with everything, these modules that are in this.
With regards to stabilization, Corey, since you're at the mic, how about resource stabilization? We suffered last fall with some changing in level of resources and experienced resources on our system, on this deployment. We seem to have brought new resources online. Are those resources staying? Are they the right ones? High confidence level. This is for you too, Steve, you and Corey. I mean, do we have what we need moving in to, and again, this critical period before the next draw? Because we kind of fell off at the end of the last year, and I just don't want to see us repeat that same error as we move into, you know, the holiday season.
Commissioner McDaniel, I think where we saw most of our issues, at least from my perspective, was on the developmental side, not necessarily on the production side. I'm very confident with my team and the team that we work with as far as what we are doing to test the draw, to test leftover cells, to test the leftover draw. I don't see a large or even a resource issue very often as it relates to that. More of my concern, again, now that we have a project plan that we can actually be able to measure what's happening on that developmental side, I think that will answer the question if we can keep it the way it is and keep things on task. And again, I don't want to speak for Steve, but I think that is the way we measure if they've addressed resources on their side.
Steve Wade, Aspira. Let me take those 3 points. Start with the resource commitment. You're right. Q1 this year, we were kind of like, yeah, we're live, everything's good, and now let's move on to the next one. Bad lesson. We have not done that this time. We still have a continuum. The project plan still moves out a fair distance. So as the various modules and pieces that need to be delivered for the system move through the process, we are just reassigning the same resources that we've had in the last 2-3 quarters onto the new Colorado products. So there has been no change in the resources that we're applying. In fact, when it comes to periods like now, just before we have major releases to the system, our resources go up, specifically focused on things like quality assurance and regression testing and those kinds of things, because it's a critical phase between when the software comes out and goes into production. So our resources actually peak at those points in time. So no, we made a commitment to you many times by many folks sitting from my company, standing up here telling you that we are not going to take resources, and we have not, and we will not until we're done. So I can assure you of that, because I've got to stand up here and talk to you. So the second question you asked about, and I want to get back to reporting, because it's a big area of the system. Basically, there's essentially 2 products that come out of the system. One is the license, the actual thing that you sell, and the other is reports. What did you do and that kind of stuff. And as Rita alluded to, we've introduced a product called Insights. Insights is a industry, I would say, industry standard implementation of a data model.